to describe conditions that affect the heart or blood vessels. This disease is often associated with an increased risk of blood clots, which can cause damage to arteries in organs such as the brain, heart, kidneys, and the eyes. The causes of cardiovascular disease can be traced to the amount of sodium we consume in our food, such as salt, processed foods, milk, creams, and condiments like fish, sauce, amongst others. And the World Health Organization recommends reducing sodium intake to avoid the risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, or heart disease. Adults should consume no more than 5 grams of salt per day, and children should consume 2 to 3 grams. You can prevent this disease by leading a healthy lifestyle, saying no to excessive sodium intake, eating fresh foods, using herbs and spices to flavor food, and reducing the consumption of processed food. Well, we have in the studio to discuss this a medical consultant and Chief Medical Director, Heritage Men's Clinic, Dr. Rashid Abbasi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you join us. There are those who will ask the question, how does consuming salt relate to cardiovascular disease? What is the correlation? How does that even happen?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. So salt, in its original way, it's not meant to be consumed. Salt is a preservative. Somewhere along the line, people discover that the more salt they put, the food gets tastier, and we start taking it. But the concern for us in physiology or in medicine is wherever salt goes, water goes. And where does that water end up? It ends up in your bloodstream. So that means the amount of work your heart has to do increases. And this heart is a machine, is meant to pump only 5 liters of blood. In you, in me, in little kids, it's 5 liters. So the more salt you consume, salt pulls water, water goes into your blood, and the volume increases. So the machine is struggling, and that's where the word cardiac comes in. So when the machine is struggling, it's not able to pump enough blood into the vessels. When blood doesn't flow, it clots, and that's where we get into trouble.
Right, and but then there is also another school of thought by medical experts as yourself who say on the face level of it, salt is good, is good, but and they even go on to say now that advocating less salt could also come with some risks. So help us to marry with.
Absolutely. So in previous research, we realized that there are some people in our society that just have low blood pressure. They are hypotensive under normal circumstances.
Hypo.
So, hypo. Yeah. Their blood pressure is not normal, it's not high. And so we realized that the hypotension itself is not really good because your organs need certain amount of pressure. When your heart pumps, the kidney gets a quarter. So if your blood pressure is low, the kidney is going to suffer from that. So they advocated back in then to give a little bit of salt because we know salt will increase your pressure. But now, as we do all the time, we go back and review, we realize that even for people with normal pressure, consuming salt over time will lead to bad issues. And so that's why they came out recently in December, January, that salt is actually no-no.
Well, you see, this same matter has led people to discover things like sea salts, Himalaya salt, all sorts of salts, and they say, okay, these ones are better than some others. Talk to us. Is there a difference, and is one better consumed than the other?
Absolutely, and take my word for research is abundantly clear. No salt is good, especially when it comes to we black people. Why? Because we are full of melanin. Melanin holds on to salt. When it holds on to salt, it has to look for water. Just like when you put table salt on your table at home, give it a few days, it's going to melt, it turns into water. That water goes into your bloodstream, and again, it's a matter of numbers. The volume goes up, your heart struggles.
So none of that sea salt?
Sea salt, Himalayan salt, all those. They evaluated. None of them is good for you and I. Salt is not meant to be consumed. It's a preservative.
All right. And, okay, so we have this advice, over the years, people when get to a certain age, cut out salt. If you can do without it, the better for you. But how do you advise patients, people to carry out a relatable, salt reduction regimen, so to speak? How do you, what's like the easiest way to go about this?
Absolutely. So in our clinic, what we do is for me to tell you to do something, I have to be willing to give you an alternative. What is there to replace it? So most of us here use salt as a condiment, seasoning. You can go alternate ways. We do cloves. we do ginger, we do garlic, you do crayfish. These are natural and they do not contain the deadly sodium. That's the issue. And the truth of the matter is your taste bud and my taste bud will not miss salt after 7 days.
Really?
Yes, after 7 days. Trust me, this has been experimented. So after 7 days, when someone gives you something salty, you'll be the one, oh, there's so much salt.
You see, they will tell you that these alternatives that you're calling are quite expensive when it comes to buying the regular salt as it is. But that aside, we look at children.
Yes.
You see that parents want to give them most of the processed foods that we see because they feel, okay, they are still children, it wouldn't affect them whichever way. And then so they keep buying these things for them. And then we see also these foods, I don't want to mention it because of advertisement and all. So I'm wondering, let's even look at children, the other side, because from what we just read, 2 to 3 grams of children, I'm wondering what the impact is on a child.
Absolutely. So we have to be careful because as parents, your children become what you actually give them. We are what we eat. And so they develop addiction. Just like to salt, they develop the same addiction to sweet tooth, to sugars, because their brain is very vulnerable. So at that time, that's when we need to step in and try to give them the right foundation. The 2 to 3 grams, because they're still growing, so they need a little bit of pressure. And that's what the study has shown. That you need to just be on the minimal side. Because when they get to the free world, they're faced with a lot of options that are processed. All these processed food, the only way they can stay on the shelf for that long is they use the preservative, which is salt, to keep them. Anything that lasts long than expected on the shelf contains a lot of sodium. And that's what you need as parents to be advocates to prevent your kids from consuming.
In terms of policy in this regard, because even here in Africa, more people are eating out, are choosing, all these fancy foods rather than
say add more. It's sweet.
Absolutely, and to be sincere, you can actually taste the salt, but I don't know what they add.
Our taste buds have just been used to them.
I don't know what else they add that just makes you want to continue to eating them. But in terms of policy, do you think we are lax as you know, in terms of governance, so to speak, when you look at what obtains abroad? If there is a way that governments can also clamp down on these manufacturers to reduce their salt?
Absolutely. We need the agency to be strengthened because then we have to take control over what we produce compared to what we import. So it has to be the agency control that says, look, what are we importing and then what are we making locally? But we also have to be aware of our socioeconomic situations. A lot of people eat from mama put. The more you eat outside, you lose control over what you're actually consuming because you buy, so you are exposed. So we have to be very mindful. But to your bigger point, the government agency, maybe NAFDAC, any agency in terms of the food regulation, needs to come up because we're paying the price. We are paying the price. We're full of cardiovascular issues, the likes of high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, metabolic syndrome. West Africa is inundated with too much numbers and it's killing us. And now what we see in our clinic is it's even affecting fertility. Salt.
Wow.
Don't take my word for it. That's what the research says.
Wow.
Interesting. So talk to us about MSG, because that's another controversial matter. And when you look at seasoning cubes, salt, MSG are part of it. But there are those who have said, MSG is actually necessary for consumption. So help us better understand, these complexities when we're talking about feeding.
So we need to be careful where this study comes from. So if you're going with lobbying or manufacturers of this MSG, then we need to look at it with a second look. So MSG, sodium, all these contain too much additives just to keep the food to stay longer on our shelf. We're not meant to be consuming things that do not go bad in 24 hours. So the more we consume those things, we're consuming chemicals. Just think about it. If you have a food that you can leave on your table counter and it can last for days without going bad, you need to check the chemical composition. They are processed. And the more they are processed, the more your organs will have to deal with those chemicals. Some of these chemicals are synthesized. They are not what our grandparents were used to.
Right.
And the word organic. So we need to go back to those that do not have any of these chemicals. MSG is relatively new to our generation. Our grandparents did not have those. So we need to find why were there less cardiovascular issues with our grandparents. And we are supposed to be more affluent of the generation. Yes, we don't move. We're more sedentary. We consume more of this processed food. We're loaded with
because
sodium.
it's easy to just, take care of whatever. You just
right.
put them in the microwave and do what is necessary.
So now we're paying the price. We're paying the price heavily because now our average lifespan in Nigeria is just got to 60. We used to be in the 50s. Why are people dying so young? Cardiovascular. Our problem in this part of the world is not communicable disease. It's not infection. It's the non-communicable silent killers. High blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, metabolic syndrome. We're the generation, we're not moving, we're consuming, we're tied to smartphone, we sit for too long. Sitting is the new smoking. Sitting is the new smoking. And then you had that with sodium. Because on the cellular level, what salt does is it destroys your blood vessel and my blood vessel. There is something in our body called endothelium. It lines all our smooth muscle. It allows you to breathe without even knowing. But when you consume salt, it gets stiff. So now your breathing becomes conscious. And that's a damaging effect.
Right. But, manufacturers now, I wonder what your advice would be to manufacturers, especially of food and the likes, who cannot do without using salt to preserve their products.
So that's where we need the government agency, because the government agency has the leverage. So we should not accept that from any manufacturer saying we cannot use this amount of salt. No. The government agency has the evidence on their side, because we cannot lose our most precious resource, which is human life. And the more we allow them to trade that for profit, that's where the issue comes in. The US government banned their own salt consumption back in December. They stipulated it. They've given them warnings ahead of time, because if you continue to allow that, manufacturers go for profit. I will not blame them. They're in there for money. Right. But then our life is precious, so you have to look at it. Quality of life matters.
Yeah, you mentioned something about how this affects our breathing. And I'm wondering if this is why people snore when they sleep.
Absolutely. One of the things we pick up on signs and symptoms of somebody having cardiovascular issues, obstructive sleep apnea, because the more salt you consume, the more water retains in their lungs. So the moment they lay down, their palate, the tongue goes backward and the water comes up, so they snore heavily. They are not getting into the restful stage of sleep, so their blood pressure goes up. The endothelium gets stiffened, so blood vessels are tight, blood pressure goes up, it leads to stroke. We have to ask ourselves, people who snore like that, why is it that most of them also end up having stroke early in the morning?
Early in the morning?
Yes. 89% of strokes are occurring in the morning.
Explain that to us.
Yes, okay. Exactly, because remember, sleep is the only time that your brain and my brain has opportunity to relax. And there are 4 stages of sleep, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The 4th one is the most important, rapid eye movement. That's when you are totally out. Most people, especially this part of the world, we're sleep deprived. We hardly get into sleep. We have chronic insomniacs. When you don't sleep, your body goes into stress control. Cortisol goes up, obstructive sleep apnea is worsened, you gain a lot of weight, blood pressure shoots up. So by the time you wake up in the morning, when your body is releasing the adrenaline that you need for the day, it increases blood pressure more, boom, stroke.
Wow. And of course, you also talked about infertility.
Absolutely.
Yes. This, help us to understand this. Yes. What makes it so? This
is very concerning to us in the men's clinic space, because so most men now are coming to us with low sperm count. And not only that, when we look at semen fluid analysis, the typical SFA, we need most men that want to have babies to have sperm that can move. That sperm that can move needs fluidity. But when you consume too much salt, the osmotic level goes up. So the sperm gets clogged. They cannot get to the egg.
So let's even now come back to this matter of the right amount. How do you measure what the right amount is? Because we're saying 5 grams of salt per day. Is it that you avoid it in the morning, have it in the afternoon, avoid it at night? How do you even measure?
So we're hoping that most of our listeners just become educated consumers. We want them to look at everything they're eating. And yes, we have the caveat that most people eat out, so they don't have control.
Yes. Right.
What we recommend is 2,000 milligrams, which is about 4 grams a day. Because we need to be aggressive about this. And we know for a fact that your taste bud will not miss it after a week. So the more aggressive, the better. Because it will be difficult to say, how much do you take in the morning, afternoon, and night? Some people don't even have the opportunity to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Actually.
They only eat once and they're loaded. Yes. And again, we know the mama put, the food tends to taste better with all this sodium. So that's where the issue comes in. And when you find out that you're becoming testy and testy more than usual, that's a sign that you are salt loaded.
All right.
Yes, because you have to be mindful. You are salt loaded. When you're waking up,
but people thought it was sugar that made people feel thirsty.
That's one of those things. You know, there